then, of course, gradually the Salafists and so on will take over.
You think so? Most Muslims in the world still live in democratic countries. I mean, if you count them by numbers.
Yes, that might be true, but you know, if you're thinking of Turkey and
talking of Indonesia, Malaysia, India.
But you were just telling me that Malaysia is not democratic.
No, Pakistan.
Oh, right. We better go back because I'm now confused.
But if we not more from a polemical point of view, but more from a point of view of if Muslims as are able to live with Western values and without regardless of what we think of the ontological problems we have with Islam and versus Christianity, is it possible? Do you think it's possible in the sense that, because you said, well, if they accept some of these?
Yes, I think the critical thing is what will be the attitude towards people who are not Muslims, and also towards people who reject Islam within the community. Are you free to leave the faith? Are people who don't have the faith free to occupy positions in the government or positions in society which bring the best rewards and so on? And I think that is much more important for our vision of secular government than any formal democratic procedures. And
that's problematic.
That is problematic. It is not problematic in Turkey, but of course Turkey ended up at the breakup of the Ottoman Empire as a more or less single faith country. But the Ottomans had developed ways in which Christians could be could enjoy
high positions within the government,
enjoy complete equality before the law with Muslims. But I think you'll find that this is very rare now in the Islamic world, and certainly almost nowhere in the Islamic world can Jews enjoy anything like the privileges of Muslims.
Now, another observation that you made is on the question of irony or irony, which is the correct irony, by the way. Yeah. So there is a lack of irony in the Quran.
Yes.
There is a lack of irony in the Quran.
Yes.
God does not make jokes. But there is a lack of irony as well in the Hebrew Bible, but not in the Gospels. Do I get you right there?
Yes, I think, well, there is, you know, the Hebrew Bible is a very mixed thing, and it contains extraordinary episodes like the Psalms, which are full of ironical remarks, and also very gentle, flowing, sort of plaintive verses.
But also, I mean, considering the Psalms, but also like the Psalm 137 of crushing your infants against the city walls.
Yes, there's some very, very bloodthirsty and disturbing things in the Old Testament. But all I wanted to emphasize in what I said yesterday is that among the most influential of the passages in the Gospels which formed our vision are straightforwardly ironical passages.
Could you give an example?
Well, my favorite example is that of Christ's response to the woman taken in adultery, who was sentenced to be stoned to death. And they asked his opinion. He said, "Let he who is without fault cast the first stone," you know, which is a wonderfully ironical way of reminding people that they too have done this, that she has been accused of, and that, and it's a way of saying, stand outside yourself for a moment.
Introspection.
Yes, and look at yourself from outside and see what a figure you're making. And then, although he in no way was endorsing what the woman had done or saying that her punishment wasn't in some way deserved, he was also nevertheless putting people in the position where they could no longer carry out that punishment because they recognized indeed the normality and the naturalness of human imperfection. And there's a kind of joke there. And you find that in the Sermon on the Mount and all through the remarks actually attributed to Christ, this spirit of gentle irony, of standing outside the human predicament and telling people not to take themselves so seriously.
Is it due to that the Gospel writers actually are Hellenized in a sense,
Well,
or a part of a larger cultural context than just the Hebrew tribe and its relations to their God.
Yes, absolutely. It's obviously, a Christian would see this simply as the way in which God is reminding us that we are, we mustn't usurp His position. But a secular or atheistical approach to the Bible would say, yes, of course, that the way to explain this is that this is a teacher arising within the Jewish community who is responding to the wider influences coming from the Roman Empire and, of course, from the distant impact of Greek philosophy.
Well, regardless of which view is the correct one, still we do have irony.
Yes.
And irony which, in a way, where a premise of this is introspection, and introspection is also in a way of self-criticism.
Yeah.
Is that what makes the West strong, an ability to ironize and to look upon yourself from the outside?
I think it's a very important feature, maybe not of our strength, but at least of our sustainability. That conflicts don't have a tendency to escalate to the point of mutual destruction.
No.
People do have a tendency to live with their neighbours on terms. They do have a tendency to compromise and not to expect absolute obedience to some impossible command. And do, on the whole, accept the defects of humanity and regard it still as possible to love. And these are very important gifts which I think do come to us originally from the Gospels and have enabled Western societies to treat their crises in a much more flexible spirit.
Would you say that the lack of irony in the Quran is an impediment for the Muslim world in that sense?
Well, I think, yes. I think if we go back to the beginnings, in the early years of Islam, of course, it took itself very seriously because it had to. It was in a survival mode and took itself seriously enough to expand. But of course, then
also a conquest mode.
Yes,
you could say.
yeah, of course. But then, as soon as the pressure was off, as is natural to human beings, a culture began to grow, a very important culture, which is full of the spirit of irony.
Because that's actually what I was coming to as well. Though the Quran or the Hebrew Bible might lack irony, you can still develop.
Of course.
You have, I mean, documented Jewish irony and Jewish humor,
Yes.
and also, I mean, like for example, Omar Khayyam is a very
I was
ironic.
just going to mention that the Sufi poets of Persia, Hafiz, Omar Khayyam, and Rumi, of course.
Yes, and the tales of Mullah Nasruddin.
Yes, and the 1001 Nights. That's one big exercise, in irony, one great joke told by a woman. But of course, you can travel the Islamic world today and not find a copy of 1001 Nights except fragments.
And Omar Khayyam is more or less forbidden
yes.
in Iran,
Yeah.
which is an irony itself.
Yes, but this is partly because of the retreat back to the Quran, not seeing it through the great veil of culture, which previous generations of Muslims have had the advantage of.
So, but it would still be possible from a practical point of view to have a renaissance of these Muslim cultural traits as well.
Yes, but it has to come from within the Muslim world.
No,
we can't
no.
impose it. But I agree, it would be wonderful if there were a renaissance.
Isn't it ironical at the same time, now talking about irony, that most of these manifestations of Muslim irony and humor were documented and saved by Western scholars?
Well, yes, of course. It's not. That's true of Islamic culture in India too. I mean, it was Sir William Jones, the judge, who went there in the late 18th century. He went there with the desire to save what he could of the Muslim culture from
At
destruction.
the same time as Saudi Arabian influences from Wahhabism were destroying them.
Exactly. It was precisely the rumours coming out of Saudi Arabia that alerted people like Jones to the need to take some action.
So, in a way, how is our understanding in the West of these universal values today, and our ability to defend them, you could say?
Well, we live in a time of excessive luxury and in which people can relax and think there's no need to defend anything. It'll just defend itself, and if we fall on hard times, the state will provide for us, and so on. So we live with a very weakened sense of community and a weakened sense of what binds us to each other. But of course there are threats growing, as we all know, and threats have a very powerful effect on the human corporate sense. They're the things that make people look for what binds them together and what they share with their neighbours. And I suspect that people will become more and more aware of these Western values and also the institutional achievements of our societies, and more inclined to defend them and to make explicit what is contained in them.
Would that really be the developmental path, or would we also turn into tribalism and feelings of brotherhood? I mean, when you and feelings of brotherhood. I mean, when you meet an opposition that claims to be a brotherhood, it's not necessary that your reaction will be to uphold universal values, but to go back to your own
brotherhood. Yes. That would be so if we had ever really had the idea of brotherhood, but the only time it has burst into the political arena in Europe was at the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité, yes. And it led immediately to 2 million deaths.
Yes, and I think the Napoleon Wars.
Yes, yeah, I think that people on the whole are pretty suspicious of the idea of brotherhood.
But there is another type of brotherhood which is not spelled brotherhood, but is spelled nationalism.
Yes, well, nationalism isn't one thing.
No.
The Swedish nationalism, if there were such a thing, would be,
there is.
Yes, it'd be a sense that that our language, our country, these things have an identity and a form of belonging. We exist here by right, a right fought for by our ancestors as well, and we have a way of life, a way of dealing with each other, a form of neighbourliness, and these are goods, and let's hang on to them. And that's a gentle form of nationalism.
And maybe with an openness. If you wish to partake in it,
yes,
you're welcome.
You're welcome, but you have to obey the rules. And that's I think, on the whole, is how Europeans experience nationhood. Of course, there are deep and atavistic feelings which are connected with language and history and religion, but over the centuries, we've learned how to contain those feelings within institutions and within customs which are non-threatening.
You've written about the orthodoxy of nihilism, in a way, that phrase that you coined, which for me seems to contain some type of critic of postmodernity of anything goes, that there are no objective truths, there are only your values and my values. We can only deconstruct them. Are these threats to the uphold?
Yes, I think that this is the principal threat to Western societies, actually, that as you said, nihilism becomes an orthodoxy, and that people who stand up for things or who express loyalties, affections and commitments of an old-fashioned kind become mocked. They're immediately regarded as somehow ridiculous and outside the fold of normal human society.
How did we come to that point? Maybe that's another interview. But
I wish I knew. I think I've seen it very much led from the front by the intellectuals. 1968 in Paris, where I became conscious of the fact that I disagreed with most of the things that were happening. That was very obviously a nihilistic movement led by first of all, by intellectuals like Foucault, Althusser, Sartre, and so on.